I didn't mean to stay so late. I only meant to return a book, a slim volume with a pale blue spine that I kept too long on my nightstand. The weather app promised rain that never came, and the streets outside were still warm from the afternoon. The library was a shade darker than the sky, a cool and patient building that belonged more to evening than to day. I stepped in with the old book in my hand and the soft hush of carpet underfoot. It was quiet in the way places become quiet when they expect to be alone soon. The air had a library scent that never fades, dust smoothed down by time, paper warmed by lamps, a breath of wood. The entry desk was empty, though I saw a note propped by the bell, back in 5. The note was written in a careful hand. I didn't ring the bell. I had returned books here for years. I knew where everything went. I slipped the book into the slot and stood there a moment longer than I meant to, listening. There's a tiny click at closing time that feels like a blink in the building. I heard it before the announcement, a relay somewhere deep in the walls. Then a voice over the ceiling speakers, low and friendly. The library will be closing in 10 minutes. It echoed in a way that made the 10 minutes sound elastic. I looked at the clock, large, round, a white face with black numbers, and then I did what I always do when a place is about to close. I took one last slow walk. The aisles were narrow and deeply shadowed, the shelves drawing long rows of dark teeth across the room. The lamps over the reading tables cast small circles on the wood. Someone had folded a newspaper and left it perfectly aligned with the edge. The building hummed in a way you felt more than heard, the air handlers breathing, the old pipes giving tiny ticks as they cooled. I could have left. I should have left. Instead, I drifted among the titles, reading the spines, letting the letters pass through my eyes without catching. A handful of words brushed the edge of me and fell away like leaves. The library will be closing in 5 minutes, the voice said. This time it was closer, as if it had walked one aisle behind me. I smiled at my own imagination and rounded the corner into local history. The lights were the warmest in this corner, the bulbs like low suns in their brass coats. The wooden map case stood on carved legs. The top drawer was labeled river names. There was a chair with a hand-woven cushion. I traced the cushion's edge with 2 fingers and felt the places where the weave was uneven. Someone had made this with care, in a room with a window long ago. The library is now closed, the voice said, gentle, unhurried. Then the lamps shifted. You don't notice lights while they are lit, only in the instant they change. The overhead fluorescence went first, a soft shiver that ran down the ceiling and left the air a richer blue. Then the desk lamps dimmed to moons. The building sighed. A door at the front clicked. I walked to the nearest end of the aisle and looked toward the lobby. The security grill had lowered in a silver ripple behind the glass doors. I could see the parking lot through its latticework, the last stripe of sunset lying low. There was no one at the desk. The note still said, back in 5. My throat made a small sound that wasn't quite a laugh. I pushed the door from the stacks into the lobby and gave the grill an experimental touch. It answered with the delicate clatter of metal in a long, patient chain. Well, I said, under my breath, as if I were answering a question. It was not fear that greeted me. It was a soft, curious quiet, the way a room looks up when you enter it alone. I took my phone from my pocket. The signal was indifferent. A bar, then none, then one again like a fish surfacing and sliding under. I typed a quick message, locked in a library. Oops, and watched it spin and fail. It didn't feel urgent. I could see the exit. I could see the world. I could wait until the librarian returned from wherever librarians go for 5 minutes. I went back to the aisles. The light was different now, more space between it and the shelves. Shadows drew their own maps along the floor. I walked slowly, letting my steps find a rhythm. The carpet yielded with a soft give that matched my breath. A book somewhere turned a page with a sound like a small wing. In the children's section, a plush dragon sat on top of a low case, its felt tongue a perpetual flame. A paper crown leaned on the story hour chair. The clock on the far wall ticked without hurry, the same 2 sounds over and over, each a soft shoe on the stair. I listened to the tick and matched it to my heart until my body forgot the difference. I rarely speak aloud when I'm alone. The library asked for a voice, so I gave it one. I'll stay until the morning, I said, as if I were telling someone in the next aisle what I had decided. Saying it settled it. The words placed down like coasters under glasses. Nothing to spill. Nothing to worry. I was safe here. I have always been safe in a library. There is a myth that after hours, the books wake up. The myth is slightly wrong. They do not wake. They are woken by the quiet. During the day, they sleep under the noise of people. At night, the noise stands aside, and the books remember themselves. They aren't loud about it. They breathe. They adjust their weight on the shelf. They sigh in print. I sat at a reading table. The chair rocked a fraction on a leg that had worn shorter than the others. I let it rock, a slow tide forward and back. I placed my palms on the wood and felt the faint rings where cups had rested. I liked the idea of all that tea and all those thoughts rising with the steam. On the table sat a small stack of recently returned books. No paper band yet. No stamp. The top book had a cover the color of old cream and a title in letters slender as reeds. I put a finger on the cover and slid it toward me. The cloth binding rasped gently, a kitten sound. I opened to the first page and saw a library slip tucked like a thin tongue into a pocket. The dates were written by hand, a slow climb of numbers going back decades. A ghost of a thumb had darkened the corner where every borrower had pinched the slip to pull it free. I did not pull it free. I held the book between my hands like a bowl and read. I read a paragraph about a quiet river and its habit of moving without appearing to move at all. I read about a village, where they measured time by the sound of the mill wheel and the way light fell through the jars in the pantry. The sentences were clean, like clear water over pebbles. The book did not press me forward. It didn't worry if I stopped. It was a book content to be held, content to be almost read, content to share its weight. When I paused to rest my eyes, the room offered its sounds. Soft air, softer than my breath. Somewhere far off, a mechanical thunk. The elevator, perhaps, remembering it had a basement. A rustle of pages rising and settling like someone turning in sleep. If fear came at all, it came like a draft under a door, cool, but not unkind, the kind you notice just enough to put on a sweater. I walked to the reference desk and stood where the librarians stand. From here, you can see the entire room at once. The aisles become lines on a page, and the lamps become commas. A pencil lay next to a notepad. Someone had sometime drawn, absent-mindedly, a small tree in the margin. The tree had 9 leaves. I counted them and counted them again for no reason. It pleased me to have a number in my pocket. On the wall behind the desk, a framed photograph showed the library when it was new. The entrance steps were wider then. The trees out front were shorter. A woman in a long skirt stood by the doors with one hand raised, her fingers caught in the act of waving. I raised my hand to her slowly, as if finishing the movement she had begun. Past reference, the stacks grew tall. The signs at the ends of the aisles listed ranges of numbers, and the numbers listed ranges of ideas. I followed them without purpose, pleased to be carried by the quiet logic of someone else's system. Mathematics, analysis, the sign said. The next, folklore. The next, sleep disorders. I touched the shelf without looking at the titles and felt the hum gather in my fingers. That was when the whispering began. Not a voice. Not yet. More like the hush of pages speaking to each other through the air. It grew in and around the shelves the way steam gathers on a mirror, slowly, then all at once. I was not frightened. I'm not brave. I am familiar. Familiarity with libraries is its own calm. If a place has held you while you were alone, you can hold it when it is alone too. Hello, I said again, softly, to the whispering, because I was too tired to be clever. The library answered by being itself louder. I took the long corridor toward the back, where the maps live in their wide drawers and the atlases bend to shelves with their deep spines. The lights here wore small shades, and the carpet changed color, as if the library had once had many rooms that had shaken hands and agreed to be one. I pulled a drawer at random. The handle was cool. The label read, Old Roads. The map inside was more brown than white, more creased than paper. It smelled like attics, like trunks, like the moment you realize your grandparents were young once. The roads were thin black veins, precise and wandering, inevitable and strange. Town names leaned with the slope of rivers. I traced one road with the pad of my finger, moving from town to town without lifting my hand. When I reached the edge of the map, I felt sure the road continued. The paper had simply decided to end. A sound behind me made me think of birds adjusting on a wire. I turned and saw the chair had moved a little from the table. Only an inch, but closed books now cast thin, different shadows. The air around the table had a look of decision. I waited. The chair stayed where it had gone. I pushed the drawer back, smooth, and listened to the paper whisper goodnight inside. If time bent at all, it bent kindly. Minutes stood at the door and looked back at the room. Hours took their shoes off and sat cross-legged on the floor. I was not watching the clock. The clock was watching me, generously, as if to say, "Take what you need." I took what I needed. I walked, I read, I listened. I let the building settle me. In the far corner, near the window wells, a table held a tray of cards. I had not seen such a thing in years. The old card catalog, thinned and repurposed, now an exhibit of itself. I drew one card up, careful not to bend it. The card had been typed, the letters slightly raised where they met the paper. Title: The Silence of Small Rooms. Author: Maris Elbassi. The numbers on the bottom line marched in a little parade. On the back, a series of stamps made a ladder of dates: 1978, 1981, 1990, 2004, 2011. I wondered which of those hands had added the faint, oily shadow to the edge. I wondered what it means for a thing to be touched more than read. I slid the car back in place. The whispering grew. Not louder precisely, closer. It was the sound of a word deciding whether to be said. I held very still and then took the smallest step, as if I could listen better by moving less. When the whispering edged into words, they came like the start of rain, dispersed, tentative, widely spaced. Here, there, third shelf down. Do you remember? I waited. The words were not at me. They were among themselves, paragraphs consulting paragraphs, indexes conferring with footnotes, poems lifting their heads from long sleep to ask the air if dawn had come. The effect was less haunting than homesick. I felt a wish in my chest to be bound in cloth and left somewhere quiet. I felt a wish to be a word held in a margin like a pressed leaf. "I'm listening," I said, and meant it. Sleep brushed my shoulders like a shawl. I could have laid my head on the table and gone under like a swimmer slipping into a lake. I did not. I wanted to see how the night was built. Down the stairwell, 2 flights, the steps shallow and confident, I found the basement. A sign said archives in a font that had once been modern. The door pushed open without effort, a door that trusted those who arrived would be careful. The basement smelled different. Books above, paper below. Paper remembers in a flatter voice. Rows of gray boxes stood shoulder to shoulder, each with a white label, each label lined with a name. Meeting minutes, women's club, birth announcements, theater programs, 1929 to 1934. I walked between them the way you walk between sleeping people. A bulb hummed without flicker. I chose a box and eased off the lid. Inside, folders lived like old cats, content to be disturbed if the petting was slow. The folder I chose said oral histories, transcripts. The first page was a typed conversation. A man named Elias recalled the winter the river froze clear to the reeds and how the town showed up on a Tuesday with skates and soup and songs. He complained gently about how things had once been better and worse in equal measure. I read until I felt as if I had been at the river too, at the edge where the ice makes a sound like glass remembering fire. When I put the folder back, the whispering upstairs had become a fuller murmur, as if the ceiling were a pond and voices were rain. It was no longer words I could catch, only the knowledge that they were there. Knowledge is heavier than belief. When you carry it, you adjust your hands. I closed the lid and stood very still. The building settled around me like a cat in a lap, a small repositioning that meant, we are here, we are comfortable, we will stay. I took the stairs back up, funneled by the handrail's cool curve. My fingers retained its temperature as if the metal had taken a photograph of my skin. On the main floor, the lamps had lowered themselves again. Not darker, calmer. I passed the big window on the west side and saw that the parking lot had become a reflective square of night. My reflection stood in it like a node on a staff, a soft, elliptical shape surrounded by lines. The air carried a new sound. It was the tiniest percussion: tap, tap, pause, tap. I followed it past the biographies, past the shelves where memoirs leaned together like neighbors sharing a fence. The sound led me to the aquarium that wasn't an aquarium at all, but a glass case that once held a model ship. Now it held nothing but light and the dust that light keeps for company. The tapping came from behind me. I turned. A book on a low shelf had crept forward a whisper's width. Its cover was black with a silver title, The Index of Lost Things. I had never heard of it. Perhaps it had never heard of me. The tapping was not tapping. It was the small, dry sound of a page lifted by the skin of air that moves when you reach out your hand. I reached. The book knew I would. My fingers met the cloth. It was cool, and then it was warm where I touched it, just as you would expect. Inside, the type was small and even, the kind that doesn't ask anything from you. The index was the book, and the book was the index. It listed the things the town had mislaid: a set of keys in the shape of a fish, a walnut-handled screwdriver, the second of a pair of red gloves. For each entry, there was a sentence. Not where it had been found, but what had happened meanwhile. Gloves, red, left. During the weeks the left glove was missing, the owner unconsciously kept her left hand in her pocket while walking, and so in those days she waved exclusively with her right. Her friends remember those weeks as very polite. Keys, fish-shaped. The keys lay under the back porch on a beam warm with afternoon. Mice ran past them in their small hurry. No one who passed overhead knew about the keys except the beam, which knew but had no mouth. I read until the entries slowed of their own accord. When I closed the book, I set it back but did not push. It remained slightly proud of the others, as if keeping me in mind. I felt kept in mind. It is a restful feeling. At the end of the row, I found a door I had never used, the kind marked with a small sign that says staff and has a handle that expects you to belong. The handle turned easily. Inside was a lightless vestibule, then a second door, then a small room full of things that made the library possible. A cart with spare bulbs, a neat box of felt pads for chair legs, a jar of red pencils. I stood inside that practical heart and felt a gratitude so gentle it felt like sleep standing up. The building cared for itself, and for us in equal measure. I touched the jar of pencils and put my hand to my chest to feel my breath say thank you. When I came back out, a draft moved the hair at my temple. Buildings breathe differently after hours. The daytime breath is outward, a welcoming. The nighttime breath is inward, a keeping. I followed it to the atrium. The clock there hung over everything like the moon. I sat on the bench under it and leaned my head back until the numbers blurred. The second hand moved as all second hands do, steady, indifferent, offering. I thought of all the times I had told time here, and all the times I had not. I thought of how much time looks like care when it is given gently. The whispering had become something more than whispering. Still not words. Not exactly, but a pattern. The way ocean sounds like ocean even if you cannot hear a single wave. I let my eyes close. I did not sleep. I drifted, which is a cousin of sleep who lives in the same neighborhood and knows all the same shortcuts. In the drift, the library grew and shrank like breath. Doors inched open to see if I wanted anything. The shelves leaned closer to offer the small of their backs as rest. I thought I felt a hand on my shoulder, not a heavy hand, not a hand at all, but the idea of a hand. And in that thought, a story opened. The story was not mine. It belonged to the library, which collects stories as easily as dust. In it, a child was locked in the building during a storm because her mother had thought the child was with her father, and her father had thought the child was with a librarian, and the librarian had been called suddenly to the back to answer the phone that rang only for emergencies. The child walked the aisles with the solemnity of children and counted the books as if she could inventory comfort. When the lights went out, she sat under the reading table and made a little nest of dropped pamphlets. And when the storm shook the windows, she whispered to the atlases about the shape of the world, and they whispered back the unpronounceable names of mountains. In the morning, the librarian found her after the mother found the librarian after the storm found itself finished. The child grew into a person who checked doors twice and always returned what she borrowed. I like that story. I set it aside like a book on the arm of a chair and reached for another. This one was about a man who could only read the first sentences of books. He'd read the first line, feel a tightening in his chest like a knot being tied, and close the book with a relief that embarrassed him. The librarians, who were the most patient of creatures, showed him a shelf labeled firsts. On it, they placed books with openings so beautiful that no one minded if he never went further. Over time, his knot loosened, and he added seconds and thirds. In a year, he had read the first 3 chapters of 50 books and was happier than he had ever planned to be. The stories kept arriving, small like gulls, landing, tidying their feathers, lifting again. I was not their author. I was the shore they visited on their way somewhere else. It is possible to be satisfied without owning. The library teaches that better than any sermon. Something shifted near the front. Not loud. Immediate. I opened my eyes and stood. The grill made its metal whisper in a vertical line. On the desk, the note that said back in 5 turned to face a slightly different angle. The clock set a time that looked like 2 hands agreeing. The night had found its center and held still there, the way a figure skater holds a long, quiet spin. I wandered to periodicals. Magazines do not age the way books age. They are less tree, more flower. Their spines are not built for decades. Even so, they hold the same patience. I chose one not for its content, but for its weight in my hand. The pages gave a papery sigh. I read about someone building a small boat in a garage and another person who had trained a shrub into a word. Neither story mattered, and both mattered. My breathing matched the motion of turning pages. In, exhale and lift, exhale and lower. The whispering rattled its beads in the background and became a soft string of comfort. Somewhere a cart moved. The carts here have rubber rims that roll without complaint. This one started from stillness and decided on a slow trip down an aisle. I peered around the end cap. The cart moved as if pushed by a careful ghost. On its upper shelf sat 4 books. On the lower, a single large atlas with a scar in its cloth near the corner. The cart rounded the next aisle and stopped by a gap. It waited. The gap waited back. Then the cart gave the smallest nudge forward, and the atlas slid, paused, and fell into place with the sound of a deep, contented sigh. "Thank you," I said to no one in particular, and then again to anyone in general. I remembered then that I had eaten dinner early and would likely be hungry at dawn. The thought was not uncomfortable. The feeling of hunger, in its first whisper, feels like a room straightening a picture on the wall. A reminder that you live in a body, that bodies have clocks independent of the ones on the wall. I patted my pocket and found a mint. I unwrapped it and held the paper for a moment. The library enjoyed the sound of the wrapper. It is a sound that knows how to be small even when it is sharp. I let the mint melt like a slow applause. It was then the voice arrived. Not the announcement speaker voice, which was a human person recorded on a day with good acoustics. Not the whispering book voice, which was a choir of unvoiced agreements. A third voice. It came from the intercom near the fire door, and it was as steady as a metronome laid on its side. "Patron," it said, with a politeness that could have been mistaken for distance. "Are you safe?" I turned toward the intercom and smiled as if it could see. "Yes," I said. "I'm comfortable." "Good," the voice said. "The exterior doors are locked this evening. We apologize for the inconvenience. A staff member will arrive at dawn." The voice did not belong to a person I could picture. It was the building speaking through a borrowed mouth, the way wind plays a bottle and calls a flute. "I'm happy to wait," I said. "I like it here." "Good," it said again, and then there was a mild pause. "If you require anything, please speak clearly. The library listens best to sentences." I almost laughed. "Don't we all?" I said. The intercom foreshortened the horizon of my humor and let the laughter wander off somewhere comfortable. The voice did not come back. It did not need to. The library had checked on me the way a friend checks that you have a blanket before a movie starts. Hours are made of small things with names: breath, heartbeat, turn, gaze. I let them accumulate without counting. I walked past travel and ran a hand along Italy, Spain, the long brightness of maps becoming names, becoming places. I stood over a globe and spun it very gently with 3 fingertips and watched oceans pull light into long streaks. In the spinning, I heard again, not the intercom, the building itself, speaking in its wood. You can hear wood if you're patient. It does not say words, but it says things. It said, I am holding. I've been holding for a long time. I will hold longer. I thanked it in a language wood understands by leaning my weight against a column until my bones and its grain made a small agreement. Perhaps I slept. Perhaps I dreamed standing up. In the dream that is not a dream, I walked into an aisle I knew too well and not at all. The books were narrow and tall. Their titles were the kinds of words you only say once in a while. Index, gazetteer, concordance. A ladder leaned against the shelves, the rung at the height of my hand. I put my foot on the lowest rung and felt the ladder accept it without wobble. I climbed 2 steps and stopped at a shelf with a book bound in a cloth as dark as midnight and a title that seemed to move when I didn't look at it. I took it down. It had no dust. The pages were thin, like the air at the top of a mountain. The type was not type. It was handwriting, dozens of different hands sharing a kindness of stroke. Each page held a night like this one. Not this night, but nights of being enclosed by care. A museum, a greenhouse, a train station, an observatory, places that had taken someone in and returned them to morning changed only by gentleness. For each, a note at the bottom. The door opened at dawn. The phrase comforted me in a way I cannot explain, a certainty so soft it did not need to be believed. The book had a ribbon. I closed on the ribbon and put it back. I climbed down. The ladder made the particular sigh of wood that enjoys being useful. When I returned to the reading table, a small stack had appeared as if a librarian had passed by. A slim volume of poems, a book of photographs taken at the same corner of the same street once a week for a year, a manual on the care of houseplants with glossy leaves. I took them one at a time. The poems walked beside me with their hands in their pockets. The photographs reminded me that change is a precise creature. The houseplants whispered about light and water like old friends gossiping kindly. It became clear to me that I had not been locked in by mistake. Or better, I had, but the mistake had the structure of kindness. The building liked company. I liked being kept. We met in the middle like 2 pages in a book being turned toward each other by an unseen hand. I stood again and drifted toward the music section. The CDs caught light and threw it back in quiet circles. The listening stations sat like small altars with their headphones folded as if in prayer. I did not turn them on. Instead, I read the backs of cases. Slow movements, nocturnes, adagios. The language of slowness is itself a lullaby. I mouthed the words, sending their shapes into the air like smoke rings that did not rise but settled. In the far case, a set of field recordings caught my eye. Night sounds of various forests. I lifted the case and let it be heavy in my hand. I knew the sounds already, though I had not listened. Leaves saying yes to wind. Frogs practicing their one-syllable sermon. An owl folding and unfolding its question. The library had gathered the night and kept it on a shelf so that any day could be made into dusk. The thought made my chest feel wide. I returned to the atrium. The moon clock showed a handful of minutes until whatever happens before dawn begins to happen. The windows began to express their glassness more. Outside, the parking lot held a single paper cup rolling itself slowly along the curb and coming to rest with dignity. The whispering had softened again. It was sleepy. Even the books rested content in their night labor, ready to surrender the listening back to humans with coffee and lists and voices that carry. I sat and let my head tip forward. My breath drew long. If a story came then, it was my own, but not in words. In temperature, in weight, in the way a place can teach a person how to be in a place. The building taught me how to be softer than I had been when I arrived. It is a strange education to learn how to set yourself down on your own table the way you would set down a book you respect. The intercom clicked in a way that felt like the end of a paragraph. Patron, the voice said, and I pictured the building clearing its throat with a little smile. Dawn. I lifted my head. The light outside was not light yet. It was the idea of light, rehearsing. The grill trembled and then rose, not loudly, not quietly. Exactly. The doors beyond showed early air that still belonged more to last night than to this morning. The clock above me was a teacher proud of class. "Thank you," I said, to the air, to the desk, to the carts, to the chairs with the felt pads and the jar of red pencils, to the map drawer and the card with the 9 leaves, to the whispering and the not whispering, to the book who had kept its place like a good memory. "Thank you for keeping me." The building answered by being itself, which is another way of saying, it let me go without holding me back. I walked through the lobby. The back in 5 note rested at an angle that now looked like a wink. I raised my hand to the woman in the old photograph, and she, at last, seemed to finish her wave. I placed my palm on a glass of the door and felt cold. The day felt like a book with its cover about to be opened. Outside, the air smelled like the first page. The sky read from a lighter script. I stood on the top step and looked back into the building and then down at my hands, which had learned the weight of pages. My phone chimed. A message delivered too late to matter. "Are you okay?" And I wrote back, "I was locked in a library, and I am." I descended the steps as the wind lifted the paper cup and rolled it along again, this time toward the bright edge of morning. Behind me, the library held a little of my heat and gave me a little of its patience. The exchange seemed fair. I thought of the book in the aisle, the one that listed lost things, and wondered what entry it would make for me. Patron, a certain, spent a night among the shelves, lost a little weight of noise, gained the habit of listening to buildings breathe. The door side closed. The clock inside continued being the moon of this place, and as I stepped into the modest traffic of an early town, the one truck, the one bus, the old man with the hat, I felt the night settle behind me like a coat put back on its hook. I did not feel alone. I felt cataloged and therefore found. Hours later, when I passed by again on my way from somewhere to somewhere else, the library was bright. Children tugged guardians. A student used the shadow of the doorway to rearrange her papers. Someone stood at the desk and laughed the kind of laugh that begins with a cough. I stepped inside, not to borrow anything, but to return something invisible I had been keeping since dawn. The light hit the lobby in a different angle, and the jar of red pencils sat where it had sat. The woman in the photograph had resumed her wave, mid-air, permanent. At the reference desk, the notepad with the little tree remained. I looked and counted again. 9 leaves. The number felt like a friend. Next to it, someone had added a second doodle, a tiny ladder leaning against nothing at all. I smiled. The intercom did not speak. It did not need to. The library listens best to sentences, and the sentence I was making was, "Here. Now. Thank you." I turned, slipped one book from a shelf, the kind of book that feels heavy for its size, and placed it on the checkout counter. The librarian scanned it, tore the due date stub, and slid it across with the quiet efficiency of a practiced kindness. "Enjoy," she said, and her voice was close to the voice of the night itself, as if the building had loaned her some of its listening. "I already did," I said, so lightly I'm not sure she heard. I stepped back into the daylight, the door's soft machinery breathing behind me, and the world's noise resumed in a key I could now hum along to. Somewhere far above all this, the moon clock kept time for those who needed it. I walked in the direction of coffee and ordinary tasks, carrying with me the small learning that a quiet place at night can teach, that being kept is a practice, that listening is a kindness, that some doors lock to keep you in, not out, and that they open precisely when you and the morning are ready to greet each other by name. That night, at home, I lay in bed with the lamp at its lowest, and when I closed my eyes, I could still feel the wooden table under my palms and the gentle slope of the uneven chair leg and the cool handle of the old Rhodes drawer. I listened to my house the way I had listened to the library, and found that it too had collected a small whispering of stories, the kettle's memory of boiling, the window's soft ache at an old storm, the hallway's gratitude for all the feet it had carried. I slept as if the building and I were turning a page together. And in the morning when I woke, I found a tiny imprint on my palm, the grain of what I'd pressed there without knowing, a little map that I could almost read, running from heartline to fingertip like a road that continues beyond the edge of the page.